Hey everyone, welcome back to Kubrick Corner with me, Sean Wilson, for my top 10 roundup of the year here in Bristol's beautiful Watershed Cinema, and I'm joined once again by Sven.
Hello.
Erstwhile journalists, fellow film fans. So yeah, we are here to bring you our respective top 10 films of the year, and I'm sure you'd agree, mate, it's been an absolutely spectacular year.
Yeah, it's been a great year. Like this sort of month is always my favorite month of the year, because then I look back at my top 10 and I always decide it's really, really good.
Yes.
And every year then you think oh, is it going to be just as good next year? And then it is.
Yes.
There's still so much strong films coming from left and right, from the east, from the west,
I hate that argument that they don't make films like they used to. I mean, that's such a lazy phrase, isn't it? I mean, anyone who engages with films extensively, like we do and like fellow critics do, there is so much out there, but it's just a case of finding it, isn't it? You have to go and find a lot of these films. Which
also some people say oh yeah, they don't make classics anymore, but I think we can only value a classic 20 years down or 10 years down the line.
Exactly.
Who knows what in a couple of years they might say about Moonlight or Get Out. Only when we are further in the future we can look back at history.
Yes, yeah. So what we're going to do, we're going to count down. We're going to do 10 to 6 in this video, and then there'll be a separate video with the films 5 to 1 to break it down into digestible chunks. So I'll hand over to your good self.
Okay.
To kick things off.
My number 10. It's maybe a bit biased. I've always been a sucker for South Korean cinema, and my number 10 is maybe a film that not a lot of people have heard about. It's a film by Kim Ji-woon called The Age of Shadows. I don't know if you managed to see that. It's an old-fashioned cloak and dagger film, but I think Kim Ji-woon shows himself as one of the most interesting and visually arresting directors working today. There are some really thrilling set pieces. He matches really interesting set pieces with a sort of old-fashioned Hitchcock sensibility, and it's basically a cat and mouse story set during the occupation of Korea by Japanese forces, and you never really know what exactly is going on because there are a lot of plot twists. But yeah, he directs that film as some sort of a magician, and you're looking at his left hand, but then everything is sort of happening in the right hand.
Yeah.
It's that kind of film. I've seen it a couple of times. And I really like that film. So number 10, The Age of Shadows.
And fantastic director, because he did A Tale of Two Sisters, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he did some really interesting genre films over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, Tale of Two Sisters.
Fantastic. Well, on to my number 10 choice then. My 10 would be Star Wars: The Last Jedi. I love this is why I love doing this. I love the contrast between those two films there at the respective bottom of our list. I saw this very recently, and yeah, it's a lot of reviewers have said it's the new Empire Strikes Back. I don't personally think it's up there with that. I enjoyed it enormously with significant caveats. I think the moments where it embraces the mythology and tweaks the mythology in order so that the movie can move forward into new vistas, new environments, that's fascinating. And I really like the way that Rian Johnson reframes the Jedi mythology as something a lot darker and edgier. Elicits a fantastic performance from Mark Hamill, who is really good. Makes you wonder, Mark Hamill is so underrated. At the same time, a lot of the humour doesn't land. Particularly, I thought in the first half an hour there are a few clumsy scene transitions. There are characters who do things within scenes that don't quite make a lot of sense. So there are. My problem isn't with Rian Johnson's ambition to shake up the Star Wars universe. I think that's fantastic. This needs to move forward, and he's been very explicit about wanting to do that. My faults with it are to do with the storytelling, and more specifically, not with the ambition of the story. But generally, I really liked it.
Yeah, because there are a couple of storylines that are maybe a bit superfluous to the main story.
Yes, yeah.
But overall, yeah, I really like it. If only every other blockbuster was only half or a quarter as good as The Last Jedi.
Yes.
I think it would be a much better world.
And as I was saying to you before we started recording, when John Williams' music kicks in during the Battle of Crate sequence at the end, that reminds you of why you go to the cinema and what is special about Star Wars and about the Star Wars experience. I thought that in and of itself redeemed a lot of the flaws for me in the film. So yeah, I really liked it. Top 10 though, not any higher than that. So So now we move on to number 9 then.
Yeah,
So
I couldn't
your
find
choice,
any
yeah.
space for Star Wars in my top 10. I think it's just below.
Yeah.
I think I've like about 50 films at number 11 this year.
Crikey, yeah.
Yeah, my number 9 is the film Aquarius by a Brazilian filmmaker called Kleber Mendoza Filho. A couple of years ago, he made a really good film called Neighboring Sounds, and he's really good at like observing people and slices of life. His films are quite gentle. They don't really seem to have like a proper story, but the way how he looks at characters, I think is really interesting. This time he tells a story about this pension. It's a retired music teacher. Phenomenal performance by Sonia Braga.
It is terrific.
And she's living in this apartment complex, but she has to move house because people want to like throw down a building and put like a new block of flats up. So it's sort of like a social commentary, but it's a very gentle observation of this woman and her place within her family and her community. It's also sometimes it is quite explicit as well. There's some explicit moments in it. But I think it's a really good film.
It's got a lot of topical social commentary, like you say, hasn't it? And there is a sense of it. I thought it was a very impressive film. Actually, it's a very interesting choice for number 9, and the fact that Sonia Braga is playing this very lusty woman whose memories are bound up with this building, and she doesn't want to leave this home behind in which she's, she has so much connected to it. I thought that was a really powerful depiction of memory and things.
Okay, your number 9.
My number 9 would be Ben Wheatley's Free Fire. So which I'm stumping for this because I don't think this movie got as much love as it deserved. Frankly, I know Ben Wheatley tends to be quite a divisive director. Obviously, his previous film before this was High Rise, which I also really liked. That was very divisive, very confrontational. It's probably his most mainstream accessible film so far, if you can describe a Ben Wheatley film like that, in as much as it embraces the conventions of the shoot 'em up, of the taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 with elements of Quentin Tarantino all mixed in there, but done with that very distinctively nasty Ben Wheatley sense of humour. It's just basically a 90-minute shootout set in the 1970s, 90-minute shootout in a Boston warehouse with various South African, Irish, American factions. And for me, it was the collision of accents in the movie between the incredibly talented ensemble cast. That creates a lot of the humour in it. I mean, Sharlto Copley as the sleazy gun runner, Verne obviously runs away with the movie entirely. And I think, minute for minute, it made me laugh more than most other films this year, just in terms of entertainment value.
Yeah, I felt the humour in Free Fire came sort of like from a very mean-spirited place.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, and that's why the film didn't really click for me. I had a lot of people who called it obnoxious. I wouldn't really go that far, but it felt for me a little bit insubstantial. I wish there was just a little bit more meat to its bones, that all the characters weren't just like stock characters.
Yeah.
But I think it's an interesting calling card for Ben Wheatley. Like, I really want to see what he can do to mainstream, because like the action scenes are really well choreographed, and that I thought was really exciting.
Yeah, it's him embracing, like you say, a more a Hollywood genre and sort of upending it, and like you say, stripping out any sense of like character. Really, that's a contentious move. It worked for me. Clearly, it didn't work for you or for any people. But yeah, it's an interesting film. I think it's an underdog movie. Yeah, it's my number 9. So.
Yeah, my number 8 is also a bit of a Marmite film. Like,
okay.
Some people really liked it. A lot of people thought it was a really dull affair. And that's The Lost City of Z,
right.
by James Gray. I think James Gray is one of the last classical American filmmakers currently working. All his films, going from his crime dramas like The Yards or Two Lovers, they're unabashedly classicistic. And this is not a crime drama. This is sort of like an explorer's tale about this man, Percy Fawcett, played by Charlie Hunnam, who is sort of like consumed and obsessed by finding this mythological city deep in the Amazon. And it's a tale about, you can call it a tale of masculinity in crisis. It's also a tale just about a man who's consumed by his obsession. And it's very elegant filmmaking, so like something that a filmmaker like David Lee might sweep onto the screen. And I don't really think that there is a filmmaker like James Gray that's still working in that kind of like modus modus operandi. I really love the soundtrack. I love the cinematography. A really interesting and nuanced performance by Robert Pattinson as well. I think the weakest link of the film is unfortunately its protagonist, Charlie Hunnam. I think he's a bit of a sort of like his character is a bit wooden, and I don't know if that was sort of like the plan of the director, or if
I think he's just basically he's there to prop up the story, isn't he? In some, like you say, in a sort of masculine, like male sense. But I do agree. I found that character not as interesting as perhaps he could have been. I do agree with you. I think the atmosphere of the movie is very, very engrossing. I think it compares unfavourably to a film that came out in this country in 2016, which was Embrace of the Serpent, which I think tackled a lot the idea of delving into Amazon culture and tribal culture in a much more interesting way. Whereas this, I think, this is obviously based on true events, but I think this dealt with it in more, I hate to use the word mainstream, a more conventional way. But I do agree. I think the atmosphere of the movie was very interesting. But yeah, maybe it didn't have that rooting human interest for me personally.
Yeah, I think it was one of the best looking films that I've seen this year. I know there was sort of like a 70 mil or like a roadshow going around. I wish I could have seen that. But yeah, it's a film that I really want to rewatch again and again.
Yeah, maybe I ought to as well, yeah. Well, on to my number 8, which is the Lego Batman movie, which I'm smiling just thinking about it now. Again, I was talking about how Free Fire, minute for minute, made me laugh more than most films this year. I mean, literally, as soon as Lego Batman started, where you have the it's blackness, like that, and then you've got Will Arnett's brilliant vocal performance where he's deconstructing the logos from the very start of the film. As soon as that started, I was like, all right, I'm in good hands here with from the guys who behind the Lego movie, which was very subversive, very witty, so it really did bite the hands that feeds filmmaking. I thought this continued in that vein, not as good as the Lego movie. It doesn't have the freshness of it, but it proves that Will Arnett's Batman character it's a brilliant creation, and in a weird way very affectionate, because it's sort of like I think he's up there with the great Batmans. I mean, in his sort of that sense of like loneliness, like narcissistic loneliness, and it's all about how Batman can't function with other people and how he can't function without his greatest nemesis, the Joker, obviously voiced by Zach Galifianakis. So the way that it used that for laughs, massive laughs all the way throughout was brilliant. I thought it was really, really warm, like really well-spirited. It's incredibly funny, and the animation, I don't know about yourself, I've spoken to several people who've said that they found the animation too busy, the fact that there was too much going on in each frame, and that maybe in that sense it might be more appropriate for adults rather than children, because adults can pick things out more.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's a film that warrants like really repeated viewings.
Yes,
I think
yeah.
There are a lot of like side gags, like blink with your eyes and you miss them.
Yes,
so I've only seen the film once. I know you've seen it numerous times.
Yeah.
And although I liked it, I don't think it's a film that really comes even near my top 10.
Yeah.
I think that the jokes, they run a bit flat towards the end. I think it goes on a bit too long. It misses a bit of focus as a film, but no, I had a really good time. I smiled from start to finish.
Yeah, I really liked it. Yeah, and I think it shows again that animation is in an extraordinary place. There will be more animations on at least my list as we go forward. But yeah, so on to your number 7.
My number 7 is the film Jackie by Pablo Larraín. I've always admired Pablo Larraín as a filmmaker. He's a Chilean filmmaker who made such films as No and The Club. And this is his first English language film. It's sort of like a biopic, but also like an anti-biopic, because it doesn't really follow any conventions that go with that genre. But it's a film about Jackie Kennedy in the wake of the death of her husband, JFK, and how she handled both like her personal life, her inner life, and the politics surrounding her. It is not a film that goes from like moment to moment. As a film, it's sort of like this like swirling kaleidoscope of emotions, led by like a really interesting score by Mika Levy, who did the soundtrack for Under the Skin a couple of years ago. Yeah, and I love the cinematography. I love sort of like the very grainy texture. And Natalie Portman, she brings one of the best performances of the year, I think.
Yeah.
So like this very hissy, insecure, former first lady. Very, very interesting film.
I think I completely agree. I'm really glad you cited the score by Michael Levy, because I think the score was very, very interesting. Also, the way that it utilises like the footage within the film of Jackie Kennedy to create that sense of like what is truth, what is artifice, and that plays into Natalie Portman's performance, which has this very almost heightened air about it, doesn't it? Which I know split opinion in some areas, but I think the whole idea of the movie is you're meant to be confronting the fabric. You're meant to be confronting the fabric of the events that happened in terms of how you interpret what Jackie Kennedy went through with
because Pablo Larraín, he's Chilean and he's not American, so I think maybe you need like an outsider's perspective on those events. As a film, it's kind of also like a very haunted experience.
Yes.
Very haunting film. So yeah, that's my number 7.
Cracking one, yeah. Well, my number 7 is it's a British film, God's Own Country, which is directed by Francis Lee, which has been doing very, very well on the independent circuit. It's same-sex gay romance movie set in Yorkshire, in the sort of wind-blasted sort of environments of Yorkshire, and it's a movie that's very, very interesting. It's about rural British life. It's about there is definitely a sort of immigration Brexit subtext going on underneath, because the idea is that the main character then starts having a relationship with an immigrant into Britain who comes to work on his family's farm. There are lots of very, very topical undercurrents, but I mean the reason why for me it worked was because it's a very hopeful movie, in spite of how raw it is. I mean, as depicted by the landscapes, it's a very, as the title implies, it's a very unforgiving environment, and in many ways, the love story that it's dealing with, you would expect to be given a sort of unforgiving treatment, but out of that, it digs out a very hopeful message, which is that people of all orientations, all backgrounds, deserve their own chance at happiness. But it doesn't do it in a glib way. It does it in a very frank, very emotionally honest kind of way. I think Francis Lee has done a fantastic job with this, and the sense of environment is remarkable. And I think the performances are superb. Yeah,
I know it's a bit of a cliche, but basically, like, the background is a bit of a character in its own right. Like, it's set in the Yorkshire moors. A lot of people called it sort of like, oh yeah, it's the British Brokeback Mountain. I think that's very derogative.
Yes.
It's a completely different film that's aiming for completely different things, and not like the only thing that they have in common is like the crux is like a gay love story.
Exactly.
But it's looked from like a completely different perspective.
Yeah.
Really interesting textures also in the film, interesting cinematography.
Well, also the interesting is it's about family tradition, whereas Brokeback Mountain Brokeback Mountain had family elements to it, but the idea is in God's Own Country, it's about whether the main character stays true to his family roots on that farm, and then into that comes the sort of the immigration subtext of it, which I think differentiates it from Brokeback Mountain. Obviously, Brokeback Mountain had a period setting as well, which obviously it's set in a completely different environment in the American West. But yeah, I do agree. I think to call it that is simplistic, and I think God's Own Country definitely stands up on its own and shows that in terms of diversity representations in films this year, I think 2017 has been fantastic for that. But yeah, that would be my choice. So we're into number 6 now. So
my number 6 is one that came out quite recently. That's the Florida Project by Sean Baker. The whirlwind of emotions that I felt leaving that cinema, I felt like happiness and sadness, and both like in equal measure. It's this uplifting story about this sort of like a family, a single mother and her 6-year-old daughter, who are living sort of like on the fringes of Disney World in this very garish pink motel. And it's a story about a child that wants to be just a child, and is not really aware of her deprived situation, and who makes the best of her life against all odds. And I like that was like a very positive message that shined through the film. I think it's maybe like the best children's performance that I've seen in quite a while. The way how Sean Baker levels himself with the kids is extraordinary. Because I heard people saying, oh yeah, it feels a bit like poverty porn. But I don't think that's the case, because Sean Baker really puts himself on the level of the kids, and he's looking around him instead of being an outsider who's looking in.
Yeah.
And I don't want to give away what happens in the ending, but it will have you sobbing in your seat. It was a film that had me sobbing at the end. Really interesting performances by both Brooklyn Prince and I don't know.
Bria Vinate, I think, who was found on Instagram.
Yeah, he found her on
fascinating.
Instagram.
Yeah, amazing. Just, I mean, I completely agree with you. It's not poverty porn. I mean, it's a film that, for the most part, is very joyous. It's about the freewheeling joy of childhood, and then all of a sudden, from about maybe halfway, 2/3 of the way through, the tragedy of the story starts to creep up on you.
Sneaks in.
Yeah, and that is beautifully managed.
The way how it's handled, I think, is the film's biggest strength. Another strength, obviously, is Willem Dafoe.
Oh, yes.
Maybe the most recognisable name in the cast.
Yeah.
For once, he's not a villain.
No.
he plays sort of like the heart and the moral conscience of the film.
Yes, yeah. Because he's not judgmental, is he? He just
not,
observes.
He's not judgmental.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are also some very funny visuals in it. There's a scene with like flamingos or some like
Yes.
birds and he has to chase away. That had me really cracking up.
Yeah. This came so close to getting in my top 10 again. There's the ruthless nature of doing these lists means you have to curtail a lot of these films. I thought it was a fantastic film, and it's visually beautiful. I think I agree with you. I think it's up there with like the 400 Blows in terms of how it looks at childhood, particularly childhood in like dire economic circumstances, which is always a very, very powerful and emotive subject. But yeah, I think fantastic choice. Sean Baker is a really interesting director and one to keep an eye on, definitely. Well, in the final part of this particular video, my number 6, which is Dunkirk. Again, lovely to have the contrast between all of these different films that we've talked about. Dunkirk's an interesting case because I've spoken to several people in the wake of its release who've said that they couldn't get into it at all. And I think the main reason for that is because although it's sort of ostensibly centred around a lot of very diverse actors. I mean, we've got thesps like Kenneth Branagh, Mark Rylance, Cillian Murphy, Tom Hardy in it, as well as like the likes of Harry Styles and Finn Whitehead. It's not a character-driven war movie necessarily. That's not the idea of it. The idea is that it uses sound and visuals to throw you into the immersive horror of the Dunkirk evacuation, but it does so without recourse to violence. There's no gore, I mean, because that would compare unfavourably to what Saving Private Ryan did. I mean, Saving Private Ryan obviously rewrote the book on like war violence. It doesn't do that. What it does is it uses the barrage of like sound and the music by Hans Zimmer and Ben Wolfish to really create that overwhelming sense of absolute terror that really doesn't let up for like 2 hours. And I think the question is whether you can get into that, whether you can pierce through that, or whether you would rather have a more maybe conventional, emotional, character-driven movie. I thought it was absolutely extraordinary, and I think that just the technical facets of the filmmaking, I mean, Christopher Nolan's obviously unsurpassed with this at the moment, and I like the fact that clearly this feels like an indie experimental movie in the guise of a big World War II blockbuster in terms of how it rearranges the storyline, in terms of how there isn't really one central character in it. And I think for me, it got Christopher Nolan back to where I wanted him to get back to after what I consider the failings of something like Interstellar, which I thought was really pompous and overblown and mawkish and didn't work. I thought this was really engrossing and
I think
really
your stand on or people's stand on Dunkirk all depends on what they think that cinema can aspire to. Because obviously this is not really a film that is a story that's told through emotions. It's a story that is told through like physical action. It's a film that is told through something that's very kinetic and very frenetic and visual. And for some people that might work. For other people, it might not work. It's not a spoiler, but it might also pop up later on in my list.
Yes, fantastic. There we go. Yeah, well, those are films 10-6 in our top 10 of the year. So, you can find me on Kubrick Corner. We'll be doing our films 5 to 1 very soon. Where can people find you, mate?
For the moment, I have things in the works. More can be revealed shortly. You can just find me on Twitter for the moment at Ilduderino.
Good name. Thanks, guys. Don't forget to give me a subscribe and to drop in with your own choices of the best films of the year list. And we'll be back very soon. See you soon.
Ciao.
Bye.